The Cartmel Masterplan, a popular term used to describe the vision of the writing trio Andrew Cartmel, Mark Platt, and Ben Aaronovitch surrounding the future of Doctor Who following its 26th season in 1989. The master plan would be developed through hints and foreshadowing throughout Sylvester McCoy's tenure as the Doctor, in an attempt to revitalise the Doctor's history and perilous future. A slip of the tongue in remembrance of the Daleks.
And didn't we have trouble with the prototype?
We?
They.
And multiple characters seemingly having a unique insight into the Doctor's superiority would give viewers a small handful of mysteries to look forward to uncovering in the next season of Doctor Who. With plenty of close shaves, Doctor Who was finally put away for good, with what seemed like no hope for a comeback. Elements of the master plan can be seen in some other media. Notably, Aaronovich's novelisation of Remembrance features a flashback sequence involving the mysterious Time Lord, known as the Other, suggesting the Doctor was somehow a part of a trio of godlike Time Lords that founded Gallifrey. Mark Platt's popular novel Lungbarrow would be the largest piece to the puzzle, and while the question of canon is common surrounding this story, this is the closest we ever got to the mystery. A quick flash forward to March 2020 would see very similar ideas being used in the series' 12th finale, The Timeless Children, although to much less praise. But what if Doctor Who wasn't cancelled? What if the master plan came to fruition? Would it have saved the declining ratings, or would it have solidified the show's fate even further? Let's take a look at the stories that could have been if Doctor Who was renewed for a 27th season. Had season 27 gone ahead, script editor Andrew Cartmel stated in Doctor Who magazine that he probably would have done it. Ideally, he would have liked to have done a season that was twice as long, more science fiction, but embedded in real issues and real ideas about people. But there was concern that Cartmel was not to remain as script editor, his replacement being either Mark Platt, Ben Aaronovitch, or potentially EastEnders writer and script editor Colin Brake. The intention was that Sylvester McCoy would remain as the Doctor throughout what likely would have been a 14-episode season, but Sophie Aldred was likely to have been written out and replaced after the first 7 episodes, although she was contracted for 8. The Doctor Who production office eventually closed down some months after season 26 had finished transmission. From what I could find, there were 13 stories considered or submitted for season 27 before the cancellation. The 3 stories tentatively lined up were Earth Aid, Thin Ice, and Crime of the Century. Additionally, there was Animal, Elixion, Avatar, Illegal Alien, Night Thoughts, A School for Glory, Hostage, Network, War of the Daleks, and The Clockwise Cuckoos. The opening 3-part serial of season 27 was to be a studio-bound space opera set on a large space cruiser with a race of samurai insect-like aliens called the Metatraxi, who were conceived as part of an aborted stage play script entitled Warworld, which later became The Ultimate Adventure. The Metatraxi's quirk, however, was that they would not engage with their enemies unless they had some sort of weapon. Following the politics of humanitarian aid, the story would open on Ace, the captain of her own ship. Ace would leave the bridge and enter her room, which contains the TARDIS and the Doctor, exclaiming to the Doctor her concerns with their mysterious plan's success. Aaronovitch, however, did have concerns over the budgetary restraints that would have prevented them from creating reasonably good models, sets and costumes for such a scene. Only vague ideas of what followed in the story existed when Doctor Who was cancelled in September 1989, before there was even a title. It would later be dubbed Earth Aid, with the alternate title Bad Destination. Earth Aid would eventually see its official release in the 2nd season of the Big Finish Lost Stories range. Co-written with Andrew Cartmel, the intended first episode of season 27 would see itself placed instead as the finale of this regenerated audio version, including a portrayal of the new companion that was to have been somewhat introduced in the next adventure. The following serial of season 27 was to have been a semi-historical 4-parter, after the success of Ghostlight. Set in London 1968, Mark Platt's story would see the return of the Ice Warriors, locked in a civil war between 2 rival factions. The setting of 60s London was chosen as Platt, Aaronovitch and Andrew Cartmel considered the 60s to be an era that the BBC designers were particularly adept at recreating, following Remembrance of the Daleks. Notably, however, this story would have seen the departure of Ace, portrayed by Sophie Aldred. Ace was to be enrolled by the Doctor at the Prydonian Academy on Gallifrey, essentially to become a Time Lord. Ace's temporal awareness starts to increase. She's aware of the grand scale of universal events, and she can stand back and see them from the Doctor's point of view. It turns out that the Doctor wants to enroll her at the Prydonian Academy on Gallifrey. That's what he's always been leading up to. The resulting argument and fury from Ace was something that fans had been hoping for. Ace would eventually turn round to the Doctor and agree to go to the Academy, despite the resentment she now holds. Cartmel would have hoped to bring back Ace's creator Ian Briggs to have a hand in her departure. As Ace departs, a new companion must be introduced, although this time as a baby that the Doctor helps deliver. This introduction of sorts leads straight into the third story, where this new companion was to be properly introduced. In addition to this, the introduction of a new recurring character was considered, an underground hippie and a dodgy brigadier type character, the father of the new companion. Much like Earthaid, this story was adapted for the second season of the Big Finish Lost Stories range. Platt returned to complete this story. This adaptation veers slightly in that Ace instead declines the Doctor's offer and decides to keep travelling with him, allowing Big Finish to chart their own course for this fan favourite character. Following straight on from Thin Ice, the third serial of season 27 would see the Doctor catch up with our new companion as an upper-class safe-cracking adult, and her father as he attempts to go straight after a period as a gang boss. The proposed name for this new companion was Raine Cunningham. Not much was planned for this serial, although Cartmel was invested in the pre-title sequence featuring Raine cracking open a safe and the Doctor being inside, exclaiming, "What kept you?" It should not come as a surprise at this point that this story was also adapted for the second season of the Big Finish Lost Stories range. The main difference between this story and what would have been was the incorporation of Ace, who would have left in the prior serial. The audios also see Raine's surname changed to Creevy. It's relatively safe to assume that Animal was to be the main choice of the fourth and final story of season 27. Cartmel had apparently hoped to write a story of his own, but didn't get any further than a Victorian or Edwardian morgue. Supposedly it was to have involved animal experimentation, drug use, animal rights activists, and was to have been Sylvester McCoy's send-off. McCoy notes that had there been a change in producer, he likely would have exited after season 27. This was the only other season 27 story to be adapted for the second season of the Big Finish Lost Stories range. As with the previous story, Ace is now included, and the audio story also sees the return of Brigadier Winifred Bambera. Additionally, there's an appearance of the Metatraxi, the enemy of the following audio story, Earthaid. Unfortunately, most of the following stories lack a lot of information. Let's look first at the 3 stories also considered for the previous season 26. This 3-part story, written by Robin Mukherjee, was initially considered for season 26, as the spare script should a planned script be dropped. The story would follow the Doctor and Ace facing a gross manipulative abbot on a monastic planet, inhabited by both humans and large beetles. When being considered for season 27, the Doctor was to play a series of deadly games, similar in vein to the Celestial Toymaker, and would have led to Sylvester McCoy's departure, and thus was another choice for the 4th and final story of season 27. This 4-part Lovecraftian tale, written by David A. McKinty, was also considered somewhat for season 26. Set in Cornwall, alien body snatchers are controlling the dead. The villain would discover the fossilised remains of a Silurian god and attempt to clone it. McKinty had since said that he was glad this story was never made, because it was crap, and he'd never had worked again. There was also a chance that the story would have been cut down to 3 parts, due to McKinty underrunning. Submitted for season 26, Mike Tucker and Robert Perry set out to create a 3-part Cyberman story set in war-torn 40s London, following some constructive criticism from Andrew Cartmel on a previous script. The first 2 episodes had been completed along with a storyline for the final episode when Ben Aranovich intercepted it. He suggested to both of them that they wait until the following season, as Andrew Cartmel was already working on something with a similar setting. This story would eventually see light of day in novel form, with Tucker noting that the opening 2 parts are damn near what was the scripted version. Considered for season 27 as a 3-part story written by Edward Young, Night Thoughts was conceived as a pastiche horror story, influenced by films like Don't Look Now and The Shining, as well as the book
Ghost Story.
Night Thoughts was to be a tale about a set of university staff stuck in an outhouse over winter, although one of them was to be a wicked murderer. After sending in a sample script with no expectation to hear anything back, Young would receive a call from the BBC to discuss potential further production. In mid-1989, Andrew Cartmel handed Young some criticism on the script. Night Thoughts is erratic and self-indulgent, but brilliant. One of the best non-commissioned scripts I've ever read. If I was doing another series of Doctor Who, I would recommend you without hesitation. Young would later adapt Night Thoughts for Big Finish, and adjusted to feature Ace and Big Finish original companion, Hex. This adaptation actually predates the Lost Stories range and is the first example of an unmade television story being adapted for Big Finish, releasing as the 79th story in the main range. Submitted by Tony Etchells and an unidentified writer, A School for Glory was to be set in World War I trenches and planned to be a relatively cheap and contained story that cut between the British trenches and some kind of British country academy. It would have seen a critical look of the warfare of World War I, and likely would not have seen any alien or monster involvement, but instead some kind of possession or telepathic force. This 3-part futuristic thriller written by Neil Penswick was about an elite group of soldiers sent to hunt down 2 shape-changing criminals, Butler and Swarf, who had stolen a weapon and taken it to an overgrown jungle planet. The Doctor and Ace would discover that the planet was the final battleground between the Time Lords and the Jaggeroth. Penswick described this story as Doctor Who meets Predator and aliens. Andrew Cartmel had thought the story rather expensive, but what he did like was the short scenes, snappy dialogue, and the action approach. Penswick would later go on to adapt this story into a Virgin New Adventures novel, The Pit. The companion was changed to Bernice Summerfield, and the enemy was the Fellowship and the great vampires from State of Decay. Very little is known about this story, presumably to be written by Ben Aranovich and Mark Platt. According to the Doctor Who magazine issue 255 article What If, a fantasised look at Doctor Who after season 26, this story was to have featured the return of the first Rani, posing as the Vice-Chancellor of a university. The Big Finish audio story The Rani Elite, written by Justin Richards, supposedly takes inspiration from this story, although this is instead a 6th Doctor story with Peri as companion and a new second incarnation of the Rani, portrayed by Siobhan Redmond. Proposed by John Peel, little is also known of this story that would have supposedly concluded the long-running Davros Dalek story arc, bringing back Skaro following its apparent destruction in remembrance of the Daleks. Although not initially accepted as a Virgin New Adventures novel, it would eventually be picked up as a BBC 8th Doctor adventure, releasing in October 1997. Andrew Cartmel's notes describe Matt Sanders as an interesting unsolicited Doctor Who writer, very sharp and weird and funny, following his submission of this script in 1989. The script itself surrounds a returning foe, the Autons, as they replace a TV game show host and his assistant. The story was also to include Syl, the Brigadier, and Colonel Crichton. Beyond the stories themselves, there was to be plenty of changes behind the scenes. Most notably, talks to redesign the TARDIS were helmed by Mike Tucker, especially since the set had been mostly junked following the production of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Had this been Sylvester McCoy's final season, John Nathan Turner would have had to consider his successor. A popular consideration from the team at the time was Richard Griffiths. The new companion would have also had to be cast. Names that had been in conversation were Julia Ormond, Julia Sawalha, and Elizabeth Hurley. Andrew Cartmel noted that he would have liked a posh English Rose type, but younger. Julia Sawalha, however, didn't want to go for the audition because she regarded it as an actress graveyard. So what do we know? We know that the season would likely have opened with the 3-part space opera Earthaid. Following this would have been the 4-part Ace departure story Thin Ice, which would have led into the Raine introduction story Crime of the Century. I'm going to assume 4 parts, not for any particular reason honestly. There are two main choices for what could have been the season 27 finale. Animal, which is the story Big Finish chose to adapt, but also Elixion. Andrew Cartmel showed great interest in a story by Robin Mukherjee, and the story itself was much more developed at the time. Because of this, I'm relatively confident that Elixion would have been the season 27 finale and see the farewell of Sylvester McCoy's 7th Doctor and another uncertain future.